businessman checked into a hotel late at night. The receptionist gave him his key but warned him not to approach the room at the end of the hall on his floor. "It's locked for a reason," she said. Curious but exhausted, he ignored it and went to his room. Around 2 a.m., he woke up thirsty and stepped out to get ice. As he passed the forbidden door, he noticed something strange. A slight whisper coming from inside. It sounded like someone muttering or praying. The next night, curiosity got the best of him. He crouched down and peered through the keyhole. At first, he saw only darkness. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized he was looking into a dimly lit room. In the center stood a man facing the wall, completely still. His skin was pale, unnaturally white. The businessman quickly backed away and rushed back to his room. The next morning, he went to the receptionist and confessed that he had looked through the keyhole. Her face turned pale. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked. The man nodded. She swallowed hard. That room belonged to a man who died years ago. He was murdered in there, and ever since, guests have reported strange noises. But the thing is, she hesitated. Every person who looks through the keyhole only sees one thing: pure red. The businessman froze. He had seen a man in white. The receptionist shook her head. His eyes, they're red. He was staring right at you. In a small town, a group of friends dared each other to spend the night in an old cemetery rumored to be haunted. They laughed it off and brought sleeping bags, planning to prove the stories were just myths. As the night deepened, one of them, Adam, noticed a fresh grave with no headstone. Something about it unsettled him, but he kept quiet. Around 3 a.m., he was awakened by a soft whisper. "That's my spot." His heart pounded as he looked around. His friends were asleep. The voice came again, closer. "You're lying in my spot." Terrified, he scrambled away from the grave and shook his friends awake. They looked at him in confusion. "What are you talking about?" one of them asked. Adam turned to point at the grave, only to see a figure standing beside it. A tall, thin man, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. Adam screamed. His friends turned to look, but the figure had vanished. They packed up and ran out of the cemetery. The next morning, they returned to prove to themselves it was just paranoia. But when they got there, the fresh grave was gone. The dirt was undisturbed, as if no one had been buried there at all. A young mother had just put her baby to sleep and was relaxing in the living room, watching the baby monitor. The screen showed her child peacefully resting in the crib. She sighed, relieved to finally have a moment to herself. Then something moved. A shadow passed over the crib. At first, she thought it was a glitch, but then it moved again, closer to the baby. It wasn't her imagination. There was something in the room. She ran upstairs, heart pounding, and burst into the nursery. The baby was still asleep, undisturbed. The room was empty. Shaking, she checked the monitor again. The shadow was gone, just static now. Trying to shake off the fear, she picked up the baby and decided to let him sleep in her room that night. As she turned off the nursery light, she glanced at the baby monitor one last time. And that's when she saw it. A pair of eyes, staring at the camera from inside the crib.